Following my last introductory video to Baldur's Gate 3 and your clear interest in me covering some more, let's take a look at the final community update for Baldur's Gate 3 before it releases in but a couple of days' time. They promise this one will answer some big questions, and they have a few surprises in store as well. So, let's take a look. And the first point is adequately juicy. We're talking about the Mind Flayers. They say that way back when they first rolled out early access, they talked about them being mysterious abilities inside of you, drawn from the Mind Flayer parasite, of course, planted deep within your brain. And they hinted right from the start that the Mind Flayers would be a central part of the story, and of course they are, as you play through the early access. Then you'll be pleased to hear about the new Powers hidden skill tree. And here we'll go drill right down into the detail. They say that in this new skill tree there will be 25 powerful Mind Flayer inspired abilities, completely separate to the options you have when you level up in the traditional sense. They're divided into 5 distinct branches, themed around the following: manipulation, health restoration, probably useful for a noob like me, psionics, and abilities that can inflict immense damage and torture enemies to gradually weaken them over time. I'm assuming those last two are 2 distinct things. Some abilities can be used to control those around you, pushing them to say things in the dialogue tree that they otherwise might not, and others endow you with the power to push and pull enemies like ragdolls during battle, full-on telekinesis-style movement. And as they demonstrate with a neat little GIF or GIF, depending on how you prefer it, you can also become a displacer beast. They say the deeper you go through the skill tree, the more powers that you'll discover, quite naturally, but nothing comes without a cost. While your companions can also consume the parasites to gain their powers, not everyone in the party will agree with it. Some of your companions' perception of you can undergo a significant shift based on how you approach it. Things can get a bit more complicated, but they don't want to spoil it, so that's all of the information we get so far on this new, a reminder, 25 powerful Mind Flayer inspire abilities filled skill tree. Say that 5 times fast. The next bit of information, a relatively quick one. As you may know, Baldur's Gate 3 has integration, audience interactivity on Twitch. If that's not an inspiration for me to at least do one fun stream on it, I don't know what is. But more importantly, they say that you can earn exclusive loot while you're watching. All you have to do is watch 2 hours worth of Baldur's Gate 3 on Twitch, and you'll earn the camp clothing set. And this runs from the game's launch on August 3rd at 9 AM PDT for 2 weeks, essentially, until August 17th. So if you want to dress up in purple, this might be the drop for you. They then move on to talk about what they call the phenomenal extended cast of Baldur's Gate 3, having last week revealed the 3rd and final villain of Baldur's Gate 3. They move on to talk about a couple of extra, additional characters that form part of the rich extended cast that they sort of claim is, brought to life by the fact that they've brought in these talented voice actors, had them actually perform and kind of live the roles of the characters. And indeed, my impression has been it's quite impressive, of course, in its early access state. They then talk a little bit more about the extended cast of Baldur's Gate 3, having last week revealed the 3rd and final villain inside of that extended cast. They go into a bit more detail about how they've, brought in these actors, these voice actors, to really try and bring each of these roles to life. And of course, the extended cast of Baldur's Gate 3 plays a pretty important role in the story, these very rich characters. They move through to give a couple of examples. One of them, for example, Lucretius, the proud leader of an extraplanar circus filled with mummies and redcaps, so on and so forth. She loves red wine and denying her employees paid holidays. So what could you not love about that? They do a couple of name drops. Doug, who's apparently the voice of Geralt of Rivia in the game series The Witcher, and they also mention, most specifically, a character inside of the game, Captain Grizzly, a former pirate who retired from a life of terrorizing the Sea of Swords to become the proud owner of the Blushing Mermaid, one of the rough taverns in Baldur's Gate. And they end that section with sort of a reminder. They say, keep in mind that certain origin stories are closely intertwined with their characters' respective classes. If you're opting for a non-cleric Shadowheart, or maybe Will without his Warlock pact, this will undoubtedly influence your roleplay options, of course, in terms of dialogue and the overall nature of the characters. Their stories will indeed be ours to create. A little bit later in the developer's diary, they return to the idea of romance in Baldur's Gate 3, something that, of course, surged to popularity recently after the now infamous bear romance scene, and I'll leave it there for purposes of the YouTube algorithm. But they wanted to go into a little bit more detail about how these mechanics might actually work and who you can romance. They say throughout your journey, you'll forge genuine connections with those you venture with, and these can flourish into relationships that add gravity to the decision that you'll make in the game. And of course, as you're moving through, characters will become more or less affectionate to you depending on how you interact with them and the decisions that you make in the world around you, whether it sort of agrees with what they believe or not. Anyway, they go on to say that you're free to pursue them however you like through deliberation, choice, and consequence, but they wanted to step back a minute and just make it really clear about where you can and can't do this. Firstly, a quick note, in some cases, you can form polyamorous relationships, which I'm sure will be pleasing to many of you out there. But they wanted to clarify who you can and who you cannot romance in the least romantic way possible. So they basically set it out in 3 bullet points. A played origin can romance an NPC. An NPC cannot romance another NPC origin, and played origins cannot romance other player origins. In summary, essentially, the relationship system is designed for romancing NPCs only, those non-playable characters only. And then they have a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek joke at the end. However, if you and your co-op partner both kiss your monitors at the same time, the static shock you'll experience produces a heart-racing effect similar to the feeling of love. Okay. One of the most impressive features, in my opinion, for Baldur's Gate 3 is the incredibly lengthy dialogue tree, that while it's not entirely customizable, you can't obviously just say whatever you like into a microphone and have it said, the branching paths are really impressive. They say that most eagle-eyed chatterboxes have noticed that Baldur's Gate 3 allows us to look back through the dialogue tree in-game in case we forget what we've said or want to sort of realign where we're at. And they're happy to confirm, yes, you don't need to worry about forgetting what you've said thanks to the ability to exactly that, go back through the conversation and get that sense. And it is a neat feature, especially if you're someone like me who maybe forgot what you said to that blue-faced character a little while ago. On the topic of doom and chatter, they say they've also had a lot of questions around how the conversations would work in a party of 4. So you've grabbed 3 of your friends, you're cruising around. Well, how do the conversations work? Who gets to say what? And so they've laid out some specific scenarios to help explain it. Typically, the character who initiates a conversation, both in single player and multiplayer, of course, whoever you're leading in your party in single player, hosts that conversation. In a multiplayer environment, the other players can witness the conversation by clicking on the appropriate icon or character, which will allow them to then vote on the host character's choices in dialogue. The host is free and often right to ignore them, however. But what if you enter a conversation with a character who has the wrong proficiencies for the choices that you're dealt? Well, it depends on a few things. When a conversation is started in Baldur's Gate 3 unexpectedly, the character who initiated whatever led to the conversation will be the host. The character's proficiencies will therefore be the ones used to decide the fate. To give an example, they say if you run around a corner and bump into someone unexpectedly, then you will be the one having that conversation. They move on to say that in some instances you can back out and re-enter the conversation with a different character in single player by selecting another member of your party. In others, however, fate works exactly as intended. Their dialogue systems are designed to feel organic, and as they probably would in real life. Where there's agency in life, there's agency in Baldur's Gate 3. They end this section with 2 important points. They say, firstly, in multiplayer, you will also have the option to set certain dialogues to private, incognito mode, so your teammates won't be able to listen into them, perfect for romance or betrayal. The second important point, and it sort of addresses more broadly the dialogue system in Baldur's Gate 3, whether it's based on class, race, proficiencies, etc., it's important to remember that there aren't really wrong answers, just a boatload of consequences. In the long term, the story will be defined by your choices and the consequences of your actions, so you'll always have decisions to make. Trust in the die, it'll be a great time. And now, a few things around launch, the size of the game, what platform systems will it work on, etc. Firstly, Baldur's Gate 3 launches, if you're watching this before launch, which you probably are, on August 3rd. 5 p.m. gent time. Nice. The full release of the game is approximately 122 gigabytes, so make sure that you've got plenty of space for that. They also say please note that your early access save games will not be compatible at launch. However, so much has changed that it's really worth starting afresh. In terms of platforms and compatibility, they say that if you've purchased Baldur's Gate 3 through Steam and GOG, you'll actually get both a PC and Mac access. So if you're on Mac, your access is all good. In terms of cross-save compatibility, Baldur's Gate 3, through the virtue of their account system, is compatible with cross-play. Of course, you won't really have much to cross-play with until the game launches on September 6 on PlayStation 5. If you wanted to play on your PC or Steam DECK, however, you could, once the game comes out on console, move sort of seamlessly through those platforms, which is great to hear. Speaking of the Steam mobile console, that DECK, you can play Baldur's Gate 3 on it, and apparently it looks rad, quote unquote. They're aiming to have it verified on launch, August 3rd. It launches on the platform with what they consider to be the most optimal graphics settings, but feel free to play around with them if you will. Also, in the diary from last time, they mentioned just one more note about split-screen co-op multiplayer. There's a throwback if I've ever seen one. In addition to having the online multiplayer, which is of course up to 4 players in Baldur's Gate 3, 2 people can also grab a couple of controllers and sit down next to each other and play 2-player split-screen couch co-op. Kind of fun, a little bit of a throwback. How many people will use it? I don't know. Really nice to see that the option's there though. Now let's talk about the specifics. If you're sitting down with your friend, if you're playing it alone, what do you need to run it? System requirements and ultra-wide support. Baldur's Gate 3 can be played in 4K and on ultra-wide monitors. Thank goodness. A PC game leaning into all of the different options. They say they created a pipeline that meant that all cinematics in the game were created in a way that supports you, regardless of whether you've got an ultra-wide 49-inch Samsung something or other, or a monitor that you flogged from work that has a terrible refresh rate and is tiny. So, never fear, hopefully all of the options will be there. On the specifics around performance, they say that with a good CPU and a GeForce 3060, you'll be able to play the game at 1440p at 60 frames per second. So there's your baseline. Reasonable GPU and a 3060 to get 1440p at 60 FPS. Man, someone who doesn't understand computers listening to that sentence would just think, what did that dude even just say? Moving on, they say that native 4K will require double fill rate, so they recommend a top-end 4080 or 4090 NVIDIA GeForce card or the AMD equivalent. And of course, with DLSS, you'll be able to reach those 4K, that 4K performance with lower requirements. So if you're fortunate enough to have access to the DLSS technology out of NVIDIA, then that will also serve you very well. And that, my friends, concludes today's video on Baldur's Gate 3. As I mentioned, I wanted it to be something more for those who have been following the game for a long time, not like my previous video, which was more of a glossy introduction to the game and sort of sharing some initial thoughts and things that you might want to be aware of if you're thinking about purchasing it and so on and so forth. I am certainly interested in taking advantage of their interesting Twitch integration. Maybe I'll do a live stream. If I do, of course, it'll be live here on YouTube as well, so you don't need to worry about specifically sourcing out my Twitch channel. I like to stream to both, but we'll just have to wait and see. I'm tossing up and sort of weighing up a few different things. So I'll leave that as a situation pending and see you all next time. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care out there.